All right, thank you everyone for your participation in the service today. Thank you, Tanya. Beautiful song, and I pray that Jesus truly is King of everything that we are and of everything that we value. We do have children's church that we provide in the back for children age 2 up through the 2nd grade, and Jody will be leading that this morning, so if you would like for your children to go with her, they're free to leave at this time. So how was your week? Good? Everybody's happy? Glad to be here? And smiling? A few of you are smiling? Not a lot of you are smiling. I'm glad that you're here. And, we finished up our series on prayer last week, and I really enjoyed our prayer service. But I don't want to just drop prayer there. I think as a church we need to spend much, much more time in prayer. And so one thing I'm going to do is every Sunday morning at 9:30, I'm going to be somewhere. Let's just say the men's classroom by the water fountain. I'm going to be in there at 9:30 praying for our services. And if you would like to come and join me, you are welcome. 9:30 each Sunday. We'll pray for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come out for devotional time. But I would like for us to just, as a body together, start praying for us and for our services, and that God will be pleased with what we do. So that's not in the announcements, so make a note. 9:30, if you'd like to join me for prayer, we'll do that. And if that room isn't big enough, we'll find another one. All right. So today I want to go back to the book of Matthew. You may remember back in the spring, we were working our way through Matthew, and then we stopped for Amazing Life and then some other things this summer. But I'd like to get back to Matthew, the gospel according to Matthew. Matthew, remember, presents Jesus Christ as the King of Kings, as the King of the Jews. And we made it to chapter 5. And remember, chapter 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew is about the Sermon on the Mount. And we looked at the first part of the Sermon on the Mount, which was the Beatitudes, and we studied those in detail. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek and the humble, and you remember all of those. And so today we're going to start in verse 13. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 13. Let me just turn there and we'll read that. And this is immediately after Jesus laid out the Beatitudes. Now remember, the Sermon on the Mount is basically Jesus' plan for his followers to live the kingdom life. So this is what Jesus expects of us in these 3 chapters. But in chapter 5 and verse 13, it says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is henceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid, neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." There was once a plant in a small city that wanted the city to make some financial concessions to them so they could expand their operations in the city. Well, as usual, excuse me, as usual, there was some opposition to the plant expanding. And one of their main arguments is that the plant didn't really contribute anything to the city, so why should the city spend its resources on the plant? Well, the wise plant manager decided that he would pay all of his employees with silver dollars instead of cash bills, right? And then all of a sudden, silver dollars started showing up all over town at the gas stations and at the restaurants and the grocery store, and so pretty soon it was obvious that the plant had a major impact on the city, and folks dropped their opposition to the expansion of the plant. How would you define influence? How would you define influence? Well, Webster says it's the capacity of causing an effect in indirect or intangible ways. That didn't make much sense to me, but I think influence is the ability to get people to see things your way. Right? And wouldn't you say that's influence? The ability to get people on your side, over to your way of thinking. So, who are some of the most influential people? Usually we think of presidents, maybe some academic people, politicians, maybe entertainers, but we usually think of big people who are in the news, right? But actually, I think the most influential people are those that are not so well known. They're hardly in the limelight, but yet they have a vast influence on society. Like a mother who patiently works with and teaches and trains her children, or a dad that's neither powerful nor famous, but he teaches his children by giving them a consistent, godly example to model. Or a high school coach who is more interested in building young men and women into what they ought to be than making a name for himself. Or perhaps a Sunday school teacher who doesn't see her students as stars on an attendance board, but future spiritual leaders of this church. Or maybe it's a quiet neighbor who's always seen going to church every Sunday, is always willing to help, to lend a hand, to pick up the mail, or whatever. You see, really, if you think about it for a minute, Christians are some of the most influential people in the world. We have the opportunity to show the world there's a better way to live. Remember those Beatitudes that I mentioned? If you and I lived out those Beatitudes in our life, we couldn't help but be influential in the world. I think that's why Jesus put them first, because when we learn the lessons in the Beatitudes, then we're in a place to live a life that will be amazing to people around us. Blessed are the poor in spirit. That's really where it all starts. Not just for salvation, but for us to live the Christian life. You know, I've been thinking, that's dangerous when I start thinking, but why aren't more people who claim to be Christian totally committed to serving the Lord? Why do so many who claim to be Christian do so little for God? Do you think that's a problem? Do y'all think it's a problem? Yeah, I've been reading C.S. Lewis again, right? Mere Christianity. I've read it before, but it's been a while, and I was struck by his discussion of faith. You know, and this has nothing to do with the message. Lori, you can relax a minute. But when we first get saved, most of the time we just give an intellectual acknowledgement to say that what the Bible says about Jesus we believe to be true. Right? So I think in the beginning we just accept some facts that we have read or we've been taught as true about Jesus. And we believe that he's the Son of God. We believe that he died for us, and we believe that he can take our sins away. But I've also observed that once you make that decision to accept those things as true, something's going to happen. And what's going to happen, you give it a week, give it a month, give it 6 weeks. What's going to happen is something's not going to go right in life. There's going to be some crisis that's going to come up. Your friends are going to jump on your back, or, there's going to be some confusion. Something is going to get you emotionally tore up to the place where you're going to begin to doubt what you said you knew was true 6 weeks before. You see, faith can kind of be overruled by emotion. Let me give you an example. You know, right? You know that if you take the human body and lay it in water and keep it still, it will float. Right? I know that. But I hate water. So if I get it out in the water over my head, I know I ought to just lay back and lay there and I'd be fine. But I don't. I start wiggling and squirming and get all stressed out. And when I get all stressed out, what happens? I sink. So my mind tells me one thing, but my emotions overrule it, right? Some of you know that a Boeing 747 will fly. You know it'll go up in the air, it'll take you somewhere and land, but you won't get on one. Why? Your fear of flying overcomes what you logically know to be true. Or what about anesthesia? Now we know that the medical community today is really, really good at anesthesia, and they can put you to sleep real quick and do surgery, and you wake up and you don't know what they did. But what if you didn't go to sleep? You ever been afraid they might start cutting on you before you were totally asleep? You see, what we know to be true can be counteracted by emotion. And that happens to, I think, everyone who's put their faith in Jesus Christ. Eventually, there's going to be emotional issue come up. Something confusing, some tragedy, something's going to happen. So our emotions are telling us this Christianity thing must not be true. And we have to work through that, right? Our faith has to grow, right? And how does our faith grow? If emotion is telling us no and our mind is telling us yes, how do we reinforce our mind? How do we get past the emotional crisis to stronger faith? Well, stronger faith comes by reinforcing the things that we know, right? In other words, if we want our faith to grow, we have to spend time. We have to spend time with God in prayer. We have to read His Word, and we have to come to church and be with other believers in Christ. And when we do those things, the things that we know to be true about the Lord are built up and reinforced and strengthened so that our emotions don't make us doubt Christianity altogether. Now, there's another aspect of faith. The other, how should I put this? The other mistake, I guess would be a good word. The other mistake that we make with faith is once we get saved, once we put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, then we get this idea that somehow living the Christian life is like getting grades on a test or a report card. And that now that we're a Christian, we have to perform, right? We have to do certain things to keep God loving us. When really what we ought to do, and this would be my challenge to you that are Christians and you know that you're saved, what you ought to do is just try for a couple of weeks to be good. Just try to be good. Try not to lose your temper. Try not to tell any white lies. Right? Try to be loving and caring. Just try with all of your might to be good. Do you know what will happen? If you're really, really, really trying to be good, I promise you, you'll fail. You'll fail and you'll go, man, I'm not very good after all. In fact, I'm pretty sorry. I can't believe I thought that. I can't believe I almost said that. I can't believe I did that. You see, and that's kind of the point. Before we will ever get to the place where we really know what it is to live by faith, we must get to the place where we realize there's nothing good in us. And there is nothing that I have that I can give God that God didn't give me first. It's kind of like when my kids come to me or used to come to me and say, you know, Daddy, give me $10 so I can buy you a birthday present. Well, that touches me, and I'm glad they wanted to buy me a birthday present, but what did it cost them? It didn't cost them anything. Now, I'm pleased that they got me a gift, and God's the same way. He's pleased when we give things. He's pleased when we give of ourselves, but it's not us. We don't have anything that God didn't first give us. And so we can't really put all our faith in God. We can't really trust Him with all of our heart till we get to the place where we realize we can't be good, until we get to the place where we realize we can't give God anything that He hasn't already given us. And so what do we have to do? We have to become poor in spirit. And I think one reason that Christians today are not more sold out to God, or not more committed to God, is because they think they're good. Well, how else could you explain not falling before God and begging for His mercy every day? It's because I think I'm good. I think I'm all right. I think God's got to be pleased with me. Look at me. You see, that's not faith. That's pride, arrogance, and self-sufficiency. They're the very things that Jesus condemns in the Beatitudes. So if we would become broken before God, if we would understand our helplessness before God, then we would cry out to God and we say, God, I can't do anything for you unless you do it in me. That's living by faith. And I'm afraid a lot of Christians never get there because we're trying to be good. We're trying to get a good grade on the test. We're trying to get a good report card. When all God says is, why don't you just come empty before me, and I will fill you up. And so, if we would do that, I think we would be more open to God. We'd be more willing to serve Him. We'd be more willing to do what He wants us to do. Understand we can't do it on our own. We need God's help. And so, why aren't Christians more influential? Why aren't we doing more for God? I think it's simply because we think we're too good. But if we would live the way Jesus wants us to live, we have influence. And so let me ask you this. Are you influencing people for Christ? Are you influencing people for Christ? If you're not, something's wrong. If you're not, something's wrong. And Jesus gives us two ways to influence others, and that's what I want us to look at. And I know you've probably heard, I don't know how many sermons on these verses in your lifetime, but they're still true. So Jesus says we should shake some salt and shine some light. So let's look at light, right? Salt. Shake some salt. What did Jesus say? That we are the salt, right? The salt of the world, the salt of the earth, right? Salt serves at least three functions. At least three functions. First of all, salt is a preservative. Now, we don't see that so much today in the world of freezers and refrigeration. We don't use salt a lot for a preservative, but it used to be, and we were talking about this last night, I think, but this used to be the main way that people preserve meat. They pack it in salt, right? You remember doing that? Yeah, if there's some of you do, right? Would pack it in salt and leave it there till it was cured, and then they would hang it in a smokehouse and give it a little hickory flavor, right? And you could keep meat a long time that way, right? And so in the pioneer days, that's how folks crossed across the United States. They'd soak that meat in salt water or brine, and then they'd pack it and they'd eat on it as they went out west. Okay? Yeah, there's even this big cave out in Kansas, and this huge salt formation in Kansas, and they store all kinds of old documents and original Hollywood films and things. They store all this stuff out in that cave. Why? It preserves it. The salt keeps the moisture and everything away. And so salt then is a preservative. And we as Christians are supposed to preserve society. We ought to influence society for the good. We should be there to hold back evil and to fight against sin. Imagine a world where there was no Christian influence. None. What kind of world would that be? The one we're about to get into if something doesn't change. Because Christians are not influencing the world the way that they should. The second purpose of salt is to add flavor. How many of you like to eat food with no salt on it? Janice likes to eat food with no salt on it, but she had to get used to it, I bet. Most of us don't, right? We probably reach for the salt shaker before we even taste it sometimes, right? But a little bit of salt can add dramatic flavor to food, can it? And when we confront worldly views, we can add flavor to society. When we go out and we show faith and we show hope and we show love to the world, we show joy to the world, that adds flavor. Right? Would you like to just live with a bunch of highly egotistical, self-centered, demanding people, or would you like to live with some loving, caring, giving Christians? Which is more flavorful? There was once a medieval king who asked his 3 daughters how much they loved him. 2 of the daughters said, "Dad, we love you more than all the silver and gold in the world." The littlest daughter said, "Dad, I love you more than salt." Well, the king was he was a little unhappy with her answer. He didn't think that was a very sufficient one. Well, it so happened that the palace cook overheard the conversation, and she wouldn't go in and confront the king, obviously, but she did decide that she would cook breakfast the next morning without any salt. And so the food was brought in to the king, and guess what? He didn't enjoy it very much. But he did remember what his daughter said. And he understood that what his daughter meant is, "Daddy, without you, nothing is good. Without you, nothing is good." And without Christian influence in society, there will be very little that we could call good. The third aspect of salt is that it creates thirst. I love fried catfish and seafood buffets. But after you eat all that fried stuff, what happens? You got to have water and more water, more water, and more water, right? We eat so much salt on all the fried stuff, fried seafood, that it creates thirst. And you and I are to be different from the people in the world so that they will see our joy and our happiness and our contentment and our faith and hope and love, and they will want it, right? Now, not everybody will, but some will see what we have, and they will be thirsty to know how we live the way that we live. Now, I want you to know, before we leave salt, I want you to notice something else. Jesus said, we are the salt of the earth. We are. He didn't say that we ought to be, or we could be, or we should be, but we are. So the question is, what kind of salt are we? And then Jesus talks about how salt can lose its savor or its flavor. Now, we know salt today, we know is sodium chloride, and we know that sodium chloride is a very stable chemical, and it doesn't quit being sodium chloride. So what did Jesus mean by salt losing its flavor? Well, in Jesus' day, salt was dug up outside, probably like down at the Dead Sea or somewhere. They would go dig up salt, and they would store it outside. The salt wasn't pure like we have. It wasn't that pretty white stuff. It was basically sand and salt mixed together. And they would often pile it outside the house, and there would be this salt pile. Well, over time, the rain would wash the salt out of the sand, and eventually there would just be some sand there that didn't taste like salt anymore. And that's what Jesus was talking about. And so that pile would lose its flavor, and then they would throw it out into the path and fill up the ruts, and they'd go get another load of salt. You see, we are salt. Now, and also, let me say this, in Jesus' day, salt was a valuable commodity. Roman soldiers were often paid with salt. That's where the phrase, not worth his salt, comes from. And also, the word salary, our word salary, actually comes from a word that originally meant salt. And so salt Salt used to be very valuable. And we are valuable, right? We are God's ambassadors. We are salt, right? Jesus said, you are the salt. We don't have to pray that God will make us salty. We are salt, right? We are the salt. We don't even have to pray that God would help us be an influence. We are an influence. The question is, do we have good salty flavor, or do we taste like sand? Are we being a good influence for Christ or a bad influence? But every one of us in here is one or the other. You can't be neutral. You can't be neutral. So it's a preservative. It adds flavor. We add flavor to society, but what good is salt in a salt shaker? You know, I can sit down at the table and maybe Kathy fixed dinner and she forgot to put any salt in it, and she sets the salt shaker on the table, and I keep eating my food, but I don't get the salt shaker and put any salt on it. I just gripe because the food tastes bad. What good is the salt sitting on the table if I don't use it? What use are we to God if we don't influence people for Him? We're useless. We're as useless as salt in a salt shaker if we don't influence people. And the salt with no flavor is good for nothing, right? Good for nothing, Jesus said. And a lot of us lose our influence, or our influence becomes bad. Let me put it that way. We lose our good influence because we're too busy trying to be like the world. We want all the fun that the world throws out there. We got to do this and that and the other, and we got to make $1 over here and $1 over there, and we got to run and see these people and do this and that and the other, and we're so busy running around, we look just like the rest of people in the world. Bad influence. We're not different. You know, what percentage of this country claims to be Christian? Born again Christian. What percent? Do you know? 25%. 25%. So a quarter of the population of the United States claims to be born again. Now let me ask you this. If I put a quarter pound of salt on a pound of meat, will it affect the meat? So why aren't a fourth of the Christians in this world affecting society more? We've lost our flavor. We're too much like the world to be an influence. William Iverson said, well, he said that about the fourth. Okay, let's move on. Shake some salt. Now we need to light out some light. Shine some light. Right? Shine some light. You are the light of the world. Right? So we're both salt and light. And there is a difference. Salt is kind of secret, inside kind of a thing. Light works openly. Light works to the outside. Salt is kind of like our indirect influence for Jesus Christ, where by a godly lifestyle, whereas light is our direct influence on people by what we say. All right, so there is a difference. You know, not only are we salt, but we are light. And light is a big theme in the Bible. I just want to read a few verses to you really quick. Psalm 36:9, for with thee it is the fountain of life. In thy light we see light. 1 John 1:5, God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. Psalm 119:105, you probably know that. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Jesus came to give light to those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death. In Luke 1:79, Ephesians 5:8, For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. 1 Peter 2:9 says, we are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar or special people, that you should show forth the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And in Philippians 2:15, we're to be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke, in what? In the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom you shine as lights to the world. That's a pretty lofty description of us, isn't it? But do we shine? Do we shine? Why? What's the purpose of light? Why do you turn a light on? Yeah, to get rid of the darkness, right? And so why should we as Christians shine in the world? To get rid of the spiritual darkness, right? That's what it's all about. We are called to shine out. But too many times we simply just shine to one another. It's kind of like we have big flashlight parties. I shine my light on you and you shine your light on me. But folks, this is not where the light's supposed to shine in here. It's out there. It's out there, right? And so Jesus gives us two examples of being the light of the world. The first one is a city, he says. A city set on a hill cannot be hid. Right, you set a city on a hill with a bunch of lights, you're going to see it from a long, long, long way off. And somebody that's a true disciple of Jesus Christ will be obvious to everyone around. William Barclay said there can be no such thing as secret discipleship, for either secrecy destroys the discipleship or discipleship destroys the secrecy. You can't be a secret disciple, right? You know, if you don't mind telling people about Jesus, they already know you love Jesus, I'm sure, right? A lot of people complain because they have to work with a bunch of ungodly people. Hey, what a mission field. Let your light shine, right? A city has a lot of lights, kind of like we as a church. We have all these individuals, right? We all shine our lights. And if we're all together, shining our lights together, a brighter light we make. The second example that Jesus gives is of a candle. Actually, it's more like a lamp than a candle. When we hear the word candle, we think of a thing made out of wax, but that's not what they used in Jesus' day. It was more of a little bowl with oil in it, and they would put a cotton wick in and light the wick, and that's how they would light their houses after dark. And but Jesus says an obvious thing. Why would you light a lamp and put it under a basket? What sense does that make? One guy said if you light a lamp and put it under a basket, one or two things is going to happen. Either the basket will put out the flame, or the basket will catch on fire. Neither one of those are very good, right? So why do men do that? Why would they light a lamp and hide it? He said, no. You put it on a lampstand. You put it up high so that it will give light to the room. That's the sensible thing to do, right? So that light will shine to all of the house, right? Too many Christians are basket lamps. We're trying to make sense out of hiding our light under a basket. And try as you might, it will never make sense. It's not natural. It's not normal. It's not what we were made for. It's not what a lamp was made for, right? And when we do it, again, we're as useless to God as a lamp under a basket. Now, Jesus goes on, he says, let your light shine, or let's let our light shine, so that people will see your good works. Now, The idea here, see, we think the idea behind good works, he's talking about the quality of our works. But really, the idea here is that we will see the beauty. They will see the beauty of our works, right? When they see us shining for Jesus, when they see us doing what Jesus wants us to see, they will see the beauty of what we're doing. It's not so much a compliment on us for doing good works. It's a compliment on Jesus who gives us the light to shine in the first place. But when they see our beautiful works, right? Our love, our courtesy, our kindness, our gratitude, our joy, our forgiveness. When they see those things, they're not going to brag on us if we do it right. They're going to glorify our Father which is in heaven, right? You know, when you're in a dark place and somebody turns on a light, even if it's just a match, just the smallest of light in a dark room is obvious, isn't it? It's obvious. One guy told this story. He said that he went down in his basement and he had some potatoes stored in the darkest corner of the basement. But he noticed that they were sprouting. You know how potatoes do if light gets to them. But he noticed these potatoes were sprouting, and he said, I couldn't figure out for the life of me how they could sprout in a dark corner of a basement. But then he went down there one day at just the right time, and hanging from the ceiling of the basement was a copper kettle that had been polished and it was shiny. And at a certain time of the day, the light would come in and hit the kettle and reflect down onto the potatoes. And that's what gave them the light that they needed to live. And folks, listen, that's us. I don't have light in and of myself. You don't have light in and of yourself. The light that we shine to the world is the light of Jesus. Jesus in us, we reflect Him. We reflect His love. We reflect His ministry. We reflect His forgiveness to those around us. And when people see that, they glorify God. So we don't live for Christ. We don't shake salt. And we don't speak for Christ. We don't shine our light for ourselves. It's not so people brag about us. It's not even so people brag about Hatley Baptist Church and say, man, what an influence they are in our community. It's for God's sake that we do it. And then Jesus said, they see your glory, they see your good works, they may glorify God in heaven. Not everyone is going to be saved when they see us, but some will, right? And that's what it's all about, bringing people to Jesus. Let's just make sure we don't stand in the way of people coming to Jesus. Now, let me wrap this up real quick. I just have some practical advice on shaking and shining. First of all, don't overwhelm people with your faith. I don't want you to get all fired up from my sermon today. Go out and to your best friend and give them 4 or 5 sermons to listen to and a dozen gospel tracts and 2 or 3 Bibles. And you don't just want to go out and blow people away by what we do, right? You don't put the whole shaker of salt on your food at one time, right? We need to be wise. We need to be sensitive. Don't shine your light right in their eyes and blind them, but ask God to guide you, right? And at the appropriate times, say something and do things, right, so that they will notice. We don't have to hit them over the head with the gospel, but on the other hand, don't be so timid that you never say anything. Right? There's a balance, and the Holy Spirit will guide us if we will pay attention. The second thing, don't forget that unbelievers are watching your every move. Unbelievers are watching your every move. You say, you know what, I'm tired and sleepy. I don't think I'll go to church today. I think I'll stay home. You're fooling yourself if you think your neighbors don't notice. They notice, right? There was a preacher one time that was out in his yard working on a trellis, putting it together. And a little boy came up and he was just watching him and watching him and watching him and watching him. Finally, the preacher said to the little boy, "You trying to get some tips on carpentry?" Little boy said, "No, I just wanted to see what a preacher says when he hits his thumb with a hammer." Now, that's a funny story, but people watch you. They watch you. And so we need to be careful. And then the third thing I would say is, don't worry if you're not immediately successful. You know, sometimes we've gone for months or years without witnessing to anybody, and we finally get convicted, and we go talk to a friend or family member, and they don't get saved. And we say, "Well, see, I told you that was a waste of time." No, it wasn't. It's never a waste of time to speak to people about Jesus. They may not get saved immediately, but they will possibly later. And many times we don't even know. One last story. Clarence Hall followed American troops through Okinawa in 1945. He and his Jeep driver came upon this small town, this small village on the island. And he wrote, "We'd seen other Okinawa villages down at the hills and despairing. By contrast, this one shone like a diamond in a dung heap. Everywhere we were greeted by smiles and dignified bows. Proudly, old men showed us their spotless homes and terraced fields, their storehouses and granaries, their prized sugar mill. He saw no jails, no drunkenness. Their divorce was unknown in the village. He was told that an American missionary had come there some 30 years earlier. While he was in the village, he led 2 elderly people to the Lord and left them with a Japanese Bible. These 2 guys started studying that Bible, and they started talking to their fellow villagers about the Bible, and the Lord changed them. It was a totally different village. And so Hall said, this is what comes out of only a Bible and a couple of guys who are willing to share it. Now, did the missionary ever know that? No. And you may not ever know the results of your shaking and shining, but it makes a difference. It makes a difference. And that's what we're here for. That's what this church is here for. If we're not going to shake and shine, if we're not going to influence people, we're nothing more than a country club, a nice civic organization doing good things in the community. We're more than that. Much, much more. Those things are important, don't get me wrong, but we're much more than that. We have the words of life. We have the words of life, a real life here and eternal life in heaven. Let's shine. Let's shake salt out. Let's be the influence that God has called us to be.